Part 6. Orthodox Line. The Second Anglo-Dutch War involved large fleets like the first, but with the longest battle of the entire Age of Sail. For the first time, both sides formed line, but other factors made the difference between final defeat and victory. By 1664, relations between the English and the Dutch were described as a kind of war and the seed of it. The Dutch attacked English trading posts at Guinea in West Africa. The English attacked a Dutch Smyrna convoy near the Straits of Gibraltar. The Restoration Navy, under Charles II, was powerful but short of funds. It became for the first time the Royal Navy, with red, white and blue squadrons. These were lead or van, short for vanguard, centre and rear. The van and centre varied between red and white, but there was another more significant difference. In the First Anglo-Dutch War, Parliament had granted the funds to create a powerful navy, but this time King Charles II was limited to such funds as Parliament would allow him. The Dutch had learnt their lessons from the First Anglo-Dutch War. This time they were the ones who were prepared to spend as much as it took. They had kept and maintained all their larger warships and had built new ships bigger with more cannon. But their 24-pounders were still smaller than the 32-pounders on the largest English ships. Their tactics were still those of disable and board, shooting at the masts and rigging to damage their opponents, then either boarding or sending in fireships to destroy them. The English tried to pick up where they had left off in the previous war by blockading the Dutch coast, but the Dutch simply would not come out. They finally met off Lowestoft on the 3rd of June 1665. The Dutch found that fireships were ineffective against ships that could manoeuvre. After 2 passes, the 2 fleets came parallel and English firepower began to tell. The cannonade could be heard 100 miles away in London. After 6 hours, the Dutch flagship blew up, and they began to turn their arses and run, as a young English seaman put it. The Dutch issued their own fighting instructions. These adopted the line of battle, but the Dutch line was allowed to snake to protect senior officers in flagships in the centre of the line. After all, they had just lost Admiral Obdam when the Eendracht blew up at Lowestoft. In January 1666, King Louis XIV of France declared war on England. He was obliged to do this by treaty. The English fleet had to divide to face the French and Dutch threats. The next battle, known as the 4-day fight, was not the biggest in terms of the number of ships involved, but in terms of actual fighting, it was the longest battle in the entire Age of Sail. Indeed, it lasted from the 1st to the 4th of June 1666. At the beginning of the battle, the Dutch had 85 ships, the English, with their fleet divided, only 54. On the first day, the English had not formed line properly. Their advantage in heavier guns was negated by high seas, which prevented them from opening their lower gun ports. On the second day, the Dutch, under Cornelis Tromp, Martin Tromp's son, abandoned their line in an unsuccessful attempt to get to windward. An English lieutenant described it as very hot in more ways than one. On the third day, the English were reduced to 34 ships still able to fight. To protect their damaged ships, they retreated in line abreast, firing stern chasers. Later in the day, another English squadron under Prince Rupert arrived. Despite this, they lost the Prince Royal, which ran aground and surrendered after its rudder was disabled and it was threatened by fireships. On the 4th day, it was a battle of pass, tack, and pass again. The Dutch had to reform their line after it broke into 3 or 4 parts. Against the new large Dutch ships, the English could no longer count on winning against greater numbers. On St. James's Day, the 25th of July 1666, both sides formed line to fight it out. This time it was 72 Dutch versus 87 English. The Dutch allowed their centre to snake, but still lost 4 admirals killed and wounded, and 25 ships taken. As a way of exploiting their victory, an English force under Robert Holmes raided Dutch merchantmen off the islands of Vlie and Terschelling. An estimated 140 merchant ships worth 2 million guilders were destroyed in what became known as Holmes's bonfire. The disasters of the Plague and the Great Fire of London added to the cost of the war, until King Charles's minister, the Earl of Clarendon, warned him that the Dutch could endure being beaten longer than he could endure to beat them. The Dutch were able to afford twice what Charles could. Indeed, the war cost the Dutch the equivalent of £11 million. Furious about Holmes's bonfire, the Dutch continued the war even though peace negotiations had begun. Without funds, by May 1667, the English fleet was laid up. The large ships were towed up the Medway. Before Charles could make peace, the Dutch raided the big ship's anchorage. At the same time, the main Dutch fleet anchored unchallenged in the Thames estuary. Royal Oak, Loyal London, and Royal James were in the Medway by Upnor Castle. They were deliberately run aground and holed. The Royal Charles and the Unity were taken, and 6 of the other big ships were burnt. After peace was concluded, according to Samuel Pepys, the English were silent in it as of a thing they are ashamed of. King Louis XIV of France invaded the Spanish Netherlands after the Spanish Empire withdrew its forces. In the secret Treaty of Dover, he actually paid King Charles II to fight the Dutch at sea in support of his invasion. The Third Anglo-Dutch War was a naval alliance with the French. The Dutch began by making a surprise attack on the combined English and French fleet, which was at anchor in Sole Bay. Conditions were favourable for the Dutch to use their preferred melee tactics, combined with a fireship attack. James, Duke of York, as Lord High Admiral, decided to reverse the order of sailing, with the result that the French squadron sailed off in the wrong direction. The Dutch concentrated their attacks against the Earl of Sandwich's squadron. They attacked his flagship, the Royal James, 100, with no less than 3 fireships. The third proved fatal. By June, Louis's forces had reached the United Provinces in the north. The Dutch held out by extensive flooding. Although the war was unpopular in England, the combined English and French fleets were necessary to support Louis's land forces. In their home waters, the Dutch only had to keep their fleet intact. As the Dutch Admiral de Ruyter said, "They will fight me when I please, and I won't when they please." After the Battle of the Texel, where Admiral Spragg was drowned and the French squadron ended up 6 miles from the action, the alliance proved so unpopular that Charles II made peace with the Dutch in February 1674.